Welcome to this masterclass, Life After the PhD. One pattern that still surprises me is how little attention doctoral education gives to what happens after completion. We spend years preparing people to begin a doctorate. We spend years helping them finish. Yet relatively little time is spent discussing what happens afterwards. This masterclass is really about understanding that transition, because completion is not an ending. It is the beginning of another phase altogether. And before we explore that phase, let's understand why this conversation matters. This slide explains exactly why this masterclass was developed. Many doctoral programs prepare people to conduct research, write a thesis, defend a viva, and complete corrections. Far fewer prepare people to build a career, rebuild a life, and understand what the PhD has actually done to them. After years of supervision and examination, I've become increasingly convinced that this gap deserves much more attention, and that naturally brings us to a hidden assumption. This slide introduces a sequence that many people expect: submission, viva, graduation, success. Reality is much more complicated. I've lost count of the number of graduates who expected immediate clarity after completion. Instead, they encountered uncertainty. Relief and confusion often arrive together, and that naturally leads us to another question. What actually changes during a doctorate? This slide introduces 6 capabilities: independent judgment, intellectual resilience, tolerance for ambiguity, complex problem solving, self-management, critical thinking. I think this is one of the most important slides in the entire masterclass, because these capabilities often become so normal to you that you stop noticing them. And that naturally helps explain why finishing can feel so strange. This slide captures something many graduates experience: emotional exhaustion, anticlimax, loss of momentum, reduced motivation, questioning whether it was worthwhile. One pattern that still surprises me is how often people feel guilty talking about these emotions. You've achieved something significant. You may not feel euphoric. That is perfectly normal. And perhaps that is because another issue is emerging: identity. I think this may be one of the most important slides in the entire masterclass. Who are you when you're no longer doing a PhD? That is a surprisingly difficult question. I've seen many graduates experience this transition. For years, the doctorate has been part of your identity. Then suddenly it's over. That adjustment often takes time, and that naturally leads us to another myth. This slide contains something I strongly believe in. The PhD is not the destination. Most graduates simply move into a new set of challenges. I've become less certain that there's ever a final arrival point in professional life. There are transitions, and the doctorate is one of them, which naturally brings us to academia. This slide introduces several attractions of academic life: research freedom, teaching, intellectual community, societal contribution. But it also introduces challenges: competition, contracts, funding pressures, publications. I've worked in academia across multiple countries, and one pattern remains consistent. Academia can be enormously rewarding, but it is also demanding. And before choosing this route, there are some important questions to ask yourself. Do you enjoy research, writing, teaching, grant applications, peer review, administration? One thing I wish more graduates understood is that academia is much broader than conducting research. Your enjoyment of the wider academic ecosystem matters enormously. And of course, academia is not the only destination. This slide introduces several alternative pathways: industry, government, consulting, healthcare, technology, entrepreneurship, NGOs. I want to normalize something immediately. Leaving academia is not failure. I've seen outstanding doctoral graduates thrive in many different sectors, and that naturally leads us to another question. This slide contains a message I strongly believe in. The value lies in the capability developed, not only the career path chosen. One pattern that still surprises me is how often graduates feel they are abandoning the doctorate if they leave academia. That simply is not true. The doctorate has already changed you. Its value goes with you, and that naturally leads us to how employers view these skills. This slide introduces 4 highly valuable capabilities: problem solving, managing complexity, communicating evidence, delivering projects. I've worked with universities, industry, and professional organizations for many years. One thing I've become increasingly convinced about is that these capabilities are often underestimated by graduates themselves. And another challenge quickly emerges: translation. This slide is one I particularly like. Research project becomes project management. Data analysis becomes evidence-based decision-making. Literature review becomes information synthesis. Presentations become communication skills. I remember one graduate saying, "I don't know how to explain my PhD to employers." This slide is the answer. You are translating capabilities, and those capabilities become your portfolio. This slide introduces 6 strengths: judgment, persistence, independence, curiosity, analysis, and communication. Looking back, I've become less certain that the thesis is the most important outcome. I've become more certain that these capabilities are, and perhaps that explains why another rebuilding phase often follows. This slide introduces areas that often receive too little attention: health, friendships, family, hobbies, finances, well-being. I've lost count of the number of graduates who postponed parts of life during their doctorate. Completion often creates an opportunity to reconnect with them. And another stage also often appears: the post-PhD void. This slide captures something many graduates experience quietly: new goals, professional development, routine, networks, reflection. One thing I wish more people understood is that feeling slightly lost after completion of a PhD is perfectly normal. It is often evidence that a major life chapter has ended, and another emotional challenge sometimes emerges too. This slide introduces something that surprises many graduates: entering competitive environments, comparing yourself to experts, increased expectations, new roles. These experiences are common. I've become less certain that confidence suddenly appears after graduation. I've become more certain that confidence continues developing long afterwards, and that naturally leads us to success itself. This slide introduces several possibilities: academic achievement, meaningful work, financial stability, family life, community contribution, and personal fulfillment. One pattern that still surprises me is how often people inherit someone else's definition of success. I would encourage you to define success for yourself. And that naturally leads us to another question. What was the doctorate really about? I think this may be my favourite slide in the masterclass. How to think, how to judge evidence, how to manage uncertainty, how to defend decisions, how to persist through complexity. I genuinely believe these are the deeper outcomes of doctoral education, and perhaps that explains why another set of questions often appears after completion. This slide contains 4 powerful questions. Was it worth it? Why do I feel lost? Should I do a postdoc? Have I failed if I leave academia? I would encourage you to normalize these questions. They're not signs of weakness, they're signs of transition. And that transition brings us to our final reflection. This slide beautifully captures the whole masterclass. Most PhD theses become dated. The person who produced the thesis continues to evolve. I think that may be one of the most important ideas we've discussed today. The doctorate may end, you continue growing. And that leads us to our final takeaways. This slide summarizes the whole masterclass. Completion is not the end. Identity transition is normal. Capabilities are transferable. Success has many definitions. If I could add one final statement, it would be this. The PhD is not the most important thing about you. It is one chapter of a much bigger story. And that naturally brings us to our final slide. Thank you for joining me for Life After the PhD. After years of supervision, examination, and working with doctoral researchers across different countries and sectors, I've become increasingly convinced of one thing. A doctorate is not simply an academic qualification. It's a period of personal transformation. The thesis may eventually sit on a shelf, but the person who emerged from producing it will continue to evolve for many years to come. And perhaps that is one of the most valuable outcomes of all.